my pleasure to introduce our next keynote speaker, Lieutenant General Leonard Kosinski, Director for Logistics on the Joint Staff. A distinguished graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and an Olmsted Scholar in Tokyo, Japan, Lieutenant General Kosinski has over 3,300 military flight hours in the KC-135 Stratotanker, the C-5 Galaxy, and the C-17 Globemaster III. He has previously served as Deputy Commander, 5th Air Force, and Director of Joint Air Component Coordination Element Japan at Yokota Air Base. Please welcome Lieutenant General Kosinski for his keynote address.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. All right, what a great crowd here. So I appreciate, I know it's been an outstanding week. I appreciate you hanging out here to the end for today. And maybe just to start off, just an opportunity to thank the whole group, especially the distinguished folks up here. I see many old friends and young, but experienced friends. But just a great community. So on behalf of the Joint Staff and the Chairman, General Brown, just thank you for what you do every day and continue to do. So, quick question. I'm not going to take names, but how many folks were able to read the article on revolutionizing logistics? Okay. If you haven't, that's fine. But I would recommend reading the entire ER. So that was just an outstanding compilation of some very good articles and the things that we need to think about as a joint force going forward. And so I'm not going to recite the article here, but what I'd like to do is to kind of take you on a brief journey about how we've kind of come up with that idea of why this is such an inflection point in our history and why really it's revolutionizing logistics is why that's needed. And my plan too is to finish up early enough to be able to have this be a dialogue. So very interested in questions, not just for what I'm talking about now, but I know you've had some outstanding and highly motivating speakers throughout the week. And from a joint perspective, glad to take on any questions that you might have. So first, just the personal journey I've had with really understanding or being exposed to anything with the logistics world. So joined the U.S. Air Force June 1989, sworn oath to the Air Force. At that time, we're still in the Cold War, at least for a few months. And also at that time, we had well over 550,000 airmen, probably twice, on active duty, twice almost of what we have right now. A few months later, Cold War ends, different paradigm on things. But during the Cold War, we had exercises called, for example, Reforger. I don't know if you've heard about that. I actually had a recent conversation a few months ago with Secretary Kendall about that. And so this is these huge movements, again, where logistics plays a huge point in moving thousands of folks and personnel and equipment through Europe. And so we had the people to do it. We were exercising to do that. We had a threat that we knew very well, the Soviet Union. Cold War ends, that's a good news story. Peace dividend, which means we've invested all this in the industrial base and in our services, but now we think we've won the war. It looks like it, right? Even former Soviet countries, Poland, Bulgaria, Hungary, all our friends now. Russia, partner in NATO. At that time, People's Republic of China was potential 1 point, whatever it was, billion at the time, potential capitalist consumers, and we helped them a lot. It seemed like the right thing to do with their military, with their economy, joining the WTO. So that just laying the dynamics of that time. June 1991, or not June, but in 1991, Gulf War I. And so a tremendous logistics feat, right? This mountain of munitions and capability that we're able to, over several months, amass to be able to do. One of the biggest logistics achievements at the time, and be able to do what we did in the Gulf War. And not to say that it wasn't, but realize all during that time, it wasn't a contested logistics. We're able to do that, and it was hard, but there was no one stopping us from deploying from home station. No one just, able to watch what we're doing with satellites and those things. Fast forward a little bit more, Kosovo, 1999. I remember as a relatively young KC-135 tanker pilot going over to, it was before the Kosovo War happened, I was on a standard deployment to go over to Turkey. They all call our squadron in a room, say, you're not going to Turkey, we can't tell you where you're going, but look to your person on the left and right, because you may not see them when you get back. We didn't take the losses and everything we were concerned with, but the logistics piece about going to Europe, even in 1999, we went places like Rhein-Main Air Base, which many probably don't remember or know, but it now is Frankfurt Airport. Other places, we had, over the course, maybe rightly so, of the 70s, 80s, moved out of France. We just didn't have enough bases and locations to operate. But we made it happen logistically there at that time. But all this time, and of course, we were divesting people, divesting that kind of capabilities, because it was a world where we thought we wouldn't really have a major adversary like that. And then September 11th, 2001, which changed a lot of things for a lot of people, and really what our military, in particular our Air Force, did for several decades. And this is just factual, just to set that context. But over that time, and many of us in here deployed to places, and not that they were safe, we lost lives, and it was a dangerous combat environment, but it was a place where we would have air superiority. We're able to operate. There's always some danger and risk there, but not consolidated bases. The way we deployed, too, is not even necessarily as a whole unit. We had people, like from this room, different bases that would go fall in on a place, that we would be able to do that for many years. I just lay that out as that this is the thing that we were building. These are the things we were training for, and this is the thing we're investing in. And here we are today, where it's a different world. Throughout all that time, throughout whether Gulf War, through Kosovo, 9/11, these last couple decades, who was watching were our adversaries, like People's Republic of China and others, to watch how we did logistics, how we were able to do things, and watch and study us. And so I just lay that out to where that's gotten us today. Another thing I propose here too, one is that logistics and what you all do and support is essential to anything we do. It's a combat operation and essential in combat maneuver. But even in the US Air Force, I'd say the last couple decades under the 21 Alpha, really the focus has been maintenance. And maintenance is hugely important, I get it. I mean, you have the best weapon systems, the best pilots, or people who think they may be the best pilots, but those planes and weapon systems don't go anywhere unless they're well maintained. Got that. But how do you maintain it in a contested logistics environment? And then it becomes not just maintaining, but supplying those logistics, that huge logistics move of being able to operate from the States, which was usually a safe haven, but not. Cyber, space, info ops, all the things that could, whether caused by adversaries or just through acts of nature and other things, cyber hacking and ransomware and others, that will prevent us from operating the way we think we have been operating, and we could operate. So another question, which I might get to, but how many people in here have secret clearance? Okay. How many have TS or above? Okay, so quite a few. That's good. The challenge I see when I interview folks for the Joint Staff, even a lot of young logisticians, and I'll single out the Army, but I think it's throughout the services don't have that. Why? Because it's expensive. You have to do it. You have limited things and time. But when you have that, you have op plans and other things that are not informed by people who really understand the logistics piece. We're trying to fix that and get after that, but I just, again, lay the groundwork that we have plans and other things that have not been formed. And that's why it's not just an adjustment to the way we do logistics, it's really revolutionizing what we're doing. General Miller's here. He has a phrase he'll talk about with equipment, but I think it's the same with concepts. You have age, there's the new old and the old new. We're trying to get as the new, but to that, not steal his idea, but you have equipment sometimes we buy, and we've been buying it forever, and because it fits on whatever truck we had 30, 40 years ago, and it looks the same and operates the same, but we don't really think, is that really the best technology and the best thing we need to do? So it's an old, but it's a new old. There's probably some old news, maybe some things that we did in the past that we haven't been doing for quite some time, but we need to be able to do. And then some new news, and that's where I, really rethinking the way through contested logistics was what I'd like to talk about today and give some suggestions on things we're doing here. So I had my experience kind of through my career, but I really didn't, and not that I say I understand logistics. I understand the challenges and where we need to go. But several years ago, I was, after Wing Command in McChord Air Force, or Joint Base Lewis McChord, selected to go over to US AFRICOM over in Stuttgart, and I was initially the CAG or the 4 stars EA and strategy person. Did that for a year and then somehow got promoted to 1 star. And so the General Waldhauser said, Leo, do you want to stay here for another 2 years in Stuttgart? And I said, well, let me check with the family. I knew they would say yes. And at that time, I could have been a deputy J5, deputy J3, although I haven't launched anything or shot anybody, so that wasn't qualified, I guess. Or J4. And the J4 in AFRICOM, up to that point, had been mobility pilots, GOs. Maybe that makes sense because it's just an immature infrastructure and you have to fly things. But I'd argue I was probably not, and still not, the most qualified logistician to be in that position. The benefit, though, is I got a chance the first year to understand Africa. 54 different countries, 4,600 miles north to south, 4,000 east to west, 9-hour flight just to go across the country. Logistics there are hard. Contested logistics is just normal operating things. We've had airmen that built runways in Agadez up in northern Niger, providing fuel in from Somalia 100 kilometers inland. Shouldn't be that hard. Even in the best of days, it's like a 19-hour drive if you don't break your axle on your truck or get taken hostage or shot at through there. So we're flying in C-130s with of fuel to offload stuff and engineering, all that piece. So I just say that really gave me an idea of, or first understanding about this contested logistics challenges. And then during my time there, like all of us, I'm not going to go through our COVID experiences, but that's where I had that experience there. So not only was it contested and hard, but now you have a situation where the 4-star commanders turn to me, Leo, give me more rubber gloves. Where are those? Go find some masks to do that. And we didn't. Supply chain, all this stuff. That just-in-time system was not in time and not able because of the fragility. But those are things we intentionally built in. And it makes sense. You want to save money, you want to do this. It maybe makes sense looking backwards, but it's not the way that we need to go forward. And that's where it's really this resilient logistics, which I'll talk about, and which I think the Air Force in a lot of ways is already moving towards. So in my time, I look here, I probably have one of the most rewarding jobs, busy job, but being in the Joint Staff J4. And I don't know if it was always that way, but one thing, and this was the way it was at AFRICOM, but in particular here, when I talk about the way they were operating and fighting for the last 20, 30 years, if you're a joint warfighter in like a CENTCOM type fight and you need to get after some adversary, you'll probably look for your 2 intelligence, your 3 operations, and your 5. The 2 will tell you, hey, here's the why you need to go after something. The 3, okay, the boss is, long range fires, use that. 5 will work dip clearance or your clearances and all that, access and basing, and then you figure out your plan, then you just find your 4 and just yell at him or her enough and you'll get the logistics to work. It's not the case anymore, but the problem is that a lot of times at that senior level, it's a 2, 3, 5, and they're all important, but the 4 wouldn't have a seat at that table. Plans were made, and this goes with out plans and other things that just aren't executable, even the best of times, but with contested logistics, incredibly important. So at AFRICOM, because of the challenge there, I did have a seat at the table. Didn't need to talk all the time, but when I did, it was impactful. But the most important was to listen to all this and be able to talk to my counterparts, whether at the table or offline, like, that's a great idea, but here's all the things you need to think about. It's not that you can't do it, but you can't do it that way. If you want to do it, here's the way you need to do it. But that logistics-informed advice, something that you all have and need to keep developing, is rare at the senior level. And it's because last few decades, logistics, it's not that it has important, your jobs aren't, but it's not been the linchpin, that existential piece. If we don't get logistics, we will not be able to win a huge conflict. It was in World War II, and to some extent World War I, that scale. And I think not that it'll be the same, but it'll be in the same, that contested logistics and understanding that will be hugely important. And so that's why I really look to all of you and the people you're leading and the people that you will continue to lead going forward to be able to be that at that senior level or advise at that senior level. I'll give an example with everyone knows General Milley, our former chairman, who in Ukraine. So Ukraine is, since I've been in the seat almost 2 years, has been an eye-opening experience. I mean, no one thought that Well, maybe some did, intel, but that Russia would invade Ukraine, but they did. And then when it initially happened, 2 weeks into it, no one, there was thought there's no way Ukraine will continue, but it has. But it has been I give all the reason because of the brave soldiers and folks in Ukraine, but a lot of it also is the support from the outside community, in particular the U.S., to provide munitions and things like that. But major munition moves from Indo-PACOM to Europe to other things are things we don't do or haven't done. And so the cost, the timing to do that. And you have a group of leaders that have grown up in the CENTCOM thing where it's still not easy. We still don't have enough logistics and capability that we would like to have, but things happen in CENTCOM, at least in the past. I mean, you move stuff, you're the center of that in the past. But there are just laws of physics. We had to move hundreds of thousands of munitions from Indo-Pacific to get to Europe. And I remember we flew some of it, makes more sense and cost effective, put it on ship, had a whole plan, and my boss is like, get it there faster. And we try, and Transcom steps up, great logistics planners, we do that. And the final linchpin is that ship, which we sailed as soon as we could and took 26 days. He's like, Leo, 26 days, why does it take 26 days? I had to take my calculator out and 4,800 nautical miles divided by 12 knots takes that long. And so, again, it's just that thinking and that scale and scope. Not that he's not smart and gets that, but we're used to this instantaneous, we can have everything we want, and that not contested piece. And just, so that's where you will be able to provide that. And maybe in the future, we don't move all that. We have space delivery and other things, but just realize that there's a whole, we have people that have grown up not understanding the importance or really understand that logistics. But the other hand, we have senior leaders now who are all over. I mean, General Milley, General Brown in particular, before he came in to his job as chairman, was our chief of staff of the Air Force. And one of his, not last things, but one of the things he did right before he left the Air Force to have a major Corona war game at Corona South on logistics. General Miller and team ran an amazing war game through that. But it was the first time in my career where I had, you had 4-star generals talking about how to get munitions places and fuel, and it wasn't about fighter intercepts, it was about those like blocking and tackling basic things in that Indo-Pacific AOR, which are hard and tough in a contested environment. And so that appreciation at senior level of what is needed, maybe not how to do it, because that's what you all come to the table with, but the fact that it is needed, is important, is there. So that's why it really, this requires an alteration of our traditional logistics paradigm, at least for the last couple decades. And even if you go back to World War II, there's lots of good examples, but it's different. I mean, there's challenges, for example, in warfighting, not that I'd be a joint warfighting commander, but if I was a few years ago, before I had some more insight on logistics and multiple 5-domain warfare and other things, if I wanted to go into fight with some country, I'd get my 2, 3, and 5, and I'd find out where my aircraft carriers are and my fighter squadrons and all that, and then worry about logistics piece. Now, if you go into anything, the first thing, where's space, where's cyber, where's logistics? And how do you fight to get to the fight and continue that? If you don't have that, it doesn't matter what incredible military, major weapon systems you have, you're not going to be able to operate, see them, or C2, or do anything without that. So that's just a different way of thinking that we need to go. So this goes, and another thing I add, so talking about security clearance and all that, just another initiative I'll share with you here is that within the joint staff, and this is actually collectively with the COCOMs now and across the DoD, we have initiated this joint intelligence effort. And so you're familiar with the J234, as I said. What we are having is maybe simply saying is a J42. And then in the intel, a J24. And why I say that is, as logisticians, we not that we don't have clearances and hear intelligence, but we have not been necessarily demanding customers with intelligence or consumers of it. And so what we've found is that there's logistics intel in different places, but not someone that wakes up every day and thinks about all our threats and vulnerabilities, just on the good guy side and gal side, and our allies and partners and industry. And to a further extent, you have intel and targeteers, but you don't have folks that understand logistics and supply chain. So I just lay that out as something that we're actually going through what's called a Joint Requirements Oversight Council, JROC, and OpSteps, tanks, big effort to really .mil PDF, changing the requirements in this for logisticians and intelligence to build that in, that capability, that education, that demand signal. And I think we had something like that before. I was only in the Cold War for a few months there in '89, but from what I read in my history books and talking to folks, we knew the Soviet Union. We knew about and that's ultimately maybe how we'd say we defeated them. We knew their industry base. We knew that. We were mass producing things to be able, Star Wars, other stuff, to do that. I'd argue that we don't have that capability at that level now, but we need it. And I also argue our adversary for these last many decades of everything I've laid out have been studying us very closely, in particular logistics. So I may not have to go through this, but just think about some of the technology changes that have happened recently. You look at in the past, things from World War II to World War I, just that advancement of technology, biplanes to jets, trench warfare, to combined arms maneuvers, spotting balloons to radar, HF radio. A lot has happened, but recently with things, whether it's hypersonics, whether it's AI type things, just the prevalence of space and cyber and that reach for adversaries or even non-state actors to be able to do and influence things. It just, as I think from the logistics perspective, the next war is, if we have that, and this is all about integrated deterrence, to have the capability so we don't have to, but if it does, we need to be postured for not just a war of industrialization in the traditional sense, but logisticians in particular to be prepared to achieve strategic aims with what we have now and the capabilities and sustain operations, but really thinking, I'd say, outside of the box. There's kind of three pillars that we're kind of looking as we go through this to transform strategic logistics. And if you get a chance to read the article, you can see it, but it shouldn't be surprising, but the focus is really on technological advancements. It's on allies and partners, and not just we talk a good game on allies and partners, but fortifying that, about building those relationships, about trust and relying on them on things and bringing them in. And I think with the allies and partners is industrial base as well, and the application of modern tools. One easy saying that we have in the J4 is just using 21st century tools to solve 21st century problems. It sounds simple, but if you look at what we do, even at the Joint Staff, and maybe you all are more advanced, but we got things like Afghan Neo and other things. We reverted back to phone calls, back to whiteboards, bringing calculators out, heavily intensive things. There's a challenge for us just to be able to see ourselves. But this is 2024. I can pull out my phone right now and order a package on Amazon and be able to track wherever that goes. And I'd argue in some ways we don't have that visibility that we need to. When I talk to even more seasoned, experienced logisticians, they explain at some point, I'm not sure when we made this transition, and not that we don't have people who are skilled in that, but data science and that type of data and data analysis capability was, and even computer programming was inherent in the logistics field. This might be why we have so many disparate systems that are run on COBOL and Pascal or whatever that stuff is. But I think we've lost that somewhat. Why? Because things have gotten smarter. We want to shorten up courses. We've been good consumers of stuff. But if you don't understand the why behind some of that data analysis, in particular going forward. And so I've heard this has come up quite often in the discussions this week, but one of our major lines of effort in the J4 and supporting the chairman's lines of effort and priorities is logistics education, joint logistics education. And I think that's something too that we have neglected somewhat. We have some good pockets of things, but some of the logistics, to become a joint logistician is trial by error or luck, or just, it shouldn't be. We should be deliberate about that. In particular, the way that we'll operate and fight. So and you've heard this from General Brown in his hat as the chairman to the Joint Force, is that first and primarily you need to be experts in your field and your services. So logisticians, if it's munitions, if it's maintenance, you need to do that and primarily. But that's not enough. It's fighting from that joint force and joint warfighter. And to include that combined, we being the kind of senior logisticians across the Department of Defense, from A4, Army G4, DLA director, Honorable Lohman, who's the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Sustainment, just recently got back from a 2-week trip to the Pacific, and which is why I might seem a little jet lagged still, because I think I'm on Australian time still. But here's what we did. So a year ago, we went out to Guam. We actually tried to go out to Philippines and Japan and all that, but even though we're the senior logisticians, we couldn't rate a plane to be able to do what we needed to do, which is fine. Going to Guam, if you go there, and this was before the typhoon, was challenging. That's a place that we all count on, and there's a lot of people who've been there maybe 20, 30 years ago that have expectations of what's there. And it's not that they're not working hard, but the capabilities there are limited. The ability for that to be a target is growing. And so ACE, Agile Combat Employment, everyone in this room gets that. How do you disperse and do that? And so this time when we went out there, flew first to Japan, met with the ambassador, country team, met with our service forward counterparts in the Japanese military, and then did some site visits in ports and industry and other places, maintenance, repair, and overhaul. What can Japan do more, and we can rely on them more? Went to Okinawa, then went down to the Philippines. Air bases down there that AMC in particular is investing a lot in. Warehouse capacity, maintenance, repair, and overhaul, warehousing, forward positioning, looking at all that, talking with our allies there, and then went down to Australia, Darwin, the northern part of Australia, where there's crocodiles, crocs in the water, and sharks, and very austere, but that's the closest place to the fight. That's that first, second, island chain. How would we operate out of there? And I tell you, that was a long trip, a lot of engagements, but very powerful to have senior logisticians all look at that together and have that discussion. And that's another thing I'd argue. Sometimes you can't help it. You're an expert in your service and you think about what the Air Force needs, but I need you to do that, but with a joint and combined, so our allies and partners, warfighter in mind. So I talked through that. The other thing I just want to emphasize again too is that the data analytics, that skill set that you need. And it's not one of the things that comes up the most when I talk with our allies and partners, or actually with anything, is really ability to share information. But first we have to know what we have ourselves, which we're working at, but then be able to seamlessly do that with allies and partners. So that just an effort that's ongoing with that. One thing I wanted to highlight is about resilient logistics. Like I said, that's one of our, actually is the theme, I think, that we've decided on for the J4, for supporting the JLEN, supporting the chairman, supporting the way forward. And just the way that we envision it, because there's probably different ways you could define it, but just something I wanted to just talk through, just as maybe for further discussion. But we envision resilient, one is that resilient logistics enables freedom of action. It's the answer to the fundamentals are what we need to do. So resilient logistics, we define it as the ability to project and to protect access to logistics materials, assets, infrastructure, modes, nodes, suppliers, networks across all domains to include information from their origin to their point of need. So that's pretty comprehensive. But that's where I need you all to think. Again, different jobs I've had deployed and other things, we've needed supplies and needed to order stuff and went through DLA and did that. And those are skills how to order stuff. But in a future fight, and what I need to do is and this is something I've seen here, in particular on the Joint Staff, but to think about the entire supply chain in that. Where is that coming from? Where can you get it locally? How can you work around that? I think it's been quite some time since us in the military. You have certain jobs like that, but just as an operator to have to worry about that. But I think those are things we need to understand. If nothing else, to be able to tell our bosses why this is taking some time. But even better, to be able to think of ways that we can work around those things. A tragic event that happened in Baltimore recently with the bridge. And so immediately when that happened, I reached out to Transcom to be able to provide advice to the chairman and SecDef on how is this going to impact operations. And so there's a few ships that are still stuck in there. There's some cargo that's not going to move directly as fast as it needs to go to for an exercise. But interesting how that works with the commercial and opportunities. It's resilient. There's other ports to move it. You can go by truck and train, move to other things. And so it's, despite that, there's ability for that organizational ecosystem to be able to do that. And industry does it. I think we need to understand and tie into how you do that. And that's part of that resilient logistics. So, as I said, I wanted to leave some time for questions, but before I end, I thought I'd share some prioritization that we just received from General Brown, our chairman. And this is things that we're tying into our lines of effort in the J4. So he's really laid out 3 things, and actually it was kind of a homework assignment, to Kosinski, here's my priorities, how are you getting after it? And he looks at in 3 bins. One is how to balance risk. The second is aligning strategic processes. And the third is advancing the joint force design, modernization, and development. So I won't go through in depth on all that, but that balancing risk, there's a lot to that. And this is something I need you to help think through too. So we have first, not just balancing it, but understanding it, being able to articulate it. Things like if you don't have a Patriot battery to protect a base, then soldiers' lives may be a danger, and you can articulate that right now. But if you extend that Patriot battery for another month or 2, extend those soldiers and aren't going home, that maintenance, what does that affect? What's that risk 2-3 years from now when you might need it and that we don't have something in there? What's the supply chain risk? All those things to be able to understand, to be able to balance it and see it. Some of that's helping with data analytics. Some of that's our efforts in just being able to get that data available and accessible to everyone. Some's using AI type ability to do that, but that is a challenge and something we're looking at across the globe. Because you talk to every COCOM and their risk is what they see through their lens, but we need to be able to articulate that broadly. The strategic processes we're looking at, and then this advancing joint force design and modernization. That's future capabilities, one thing that we as a joint force have neglected with the services over the last couple decades is that last tactical mile. DLA, all of us work with them, they've been great. Order stuff, it shows up time and point of need. But what if that time and point of need is in some contested environment that's like 2,000 miles in? How do you distribute and get that fuel and parts and things? The other risk that to articulate when it comes to acquisition and buying things, you can't buy half an aircraft carrier, that's not going to work, or 2/3 of a B-21. But what you can do is to short yourself on parts and spares, short yourself on munitions and other things. That's fungible. Those things you can take that risk at now, but you do that now, and even though it's a brand new weapon system, it should be great. Well, if it doesn't have parts 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, what's that risk we're adding in? And that's something, again, we need to be able to articulate and understand better, we collectively, and looking at all the smart folks in this room to help us with that. Because it really comes down to understanding, taking prudent risk, because there's going to be risk involved in that. But first you have to know what risk you have to be able to articulate and do that. Maybe the last thing I'll leave with, and I touched on this, and one, you already get credit for being here at LOA, because this is an outstanding organization of just education and learning. And maybe the best part is that not the guest speakers, because it's not me, but it's all the folks out there that you're meeting and engaging with and catching up with. Building your experience and knowledge base and network is hugely important. Continue to challenge yourself by reading, by further educating, by understanding technologies. And there's all kinds of courses and other opportunities out there, but you need to read and understand broadly and to be able to do this resilient logistics, to be able to meet the needs of the warfighter and your joint warfighting commanders of the future. So I think that's how I want to finish it up. Although, I guess maybe lastly, just in case I don't get a chance to say this again, but just, again, thank you for all that you do. Thanks for LOA. Thanks for the senior leadership here. Thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Nina Myers, who helped pretty much write most of the article, so who's out there somewhere. But let me stop here, and then maybe I have just some time for questions if I can. So, and you can go to the next slide, please. Yeah.
Looking across the military services portfolio, do you believe the services are investing in the right capabilities to meet the needs of joint force logistics concepts?
Yeah. So we have a process, this Joint Requirements Oversight Council, and we also have beyond just the Joint Force, but our allies and partners, this new International Joint Requirements Oversight Council. So it's improving over time. But I still think the way that we are structured is that services are incentivized to buy what services need. And if it helps out the joint force, that's good, that'll justify it. If it doesn't, then they tend to sometimes ignore it. Now, I think all of us at heart want to support the joint warfighter. So I'd give some success cases I think we're having. For example, the Marines want a ship to be able to carry their Marines to be able to do what they need to do. The Army wants a ship too. Marines wanted to go 15 knots. Army wants to go 22 knots, which really is impossible. But you could build two ships, have two production lines, or figure out how you have a joint solution that we could all use to get after. So I think there's more of that joint piece, but yeah, so we can always do better, but that's kind of in our wheelhouse to be able to help and work among the services to get those joint solutions, especially in limited budgets. I mean, we don't need any, that's one thing to be able to invest. The other is to, well, not necessarily in the question, but ability to, this replicator type, quick development of things that we can make quickly and that are attritable, those other things. But those are joint solutions as well, and those are things that we're working in, and I'm seeing good movement for the services for combined joint solutions.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate it.
That's the last question, or?
Last question, sir. Sorry.
That was it? Okay, I guess I'm got the hook, I guess. That's it? Okay, all right. No, but hey, this is a great opportunity. I appreciate what you get to do. I'll be able to hang out a little bit here, but then I'm called to go back to the Pentagon tonight. So, but just again, I've heard nothing but great things this week. The fact you're all here and this number of folks, outstanding. And so if anything, just remember we're very appreciative, but also we have to get after it. There's a lot of stuff we need to do, and I'm really looking at this audience as a hope for our future, because if we can't get the contested logistics stuff right, that joint stuff, logistics stuff right, stuff that you are responsible for now and will be for the future, we're not going to be able to win at the rate and speed and need that we will need to in the future. So continue working hard and get after it. But thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day. Thanks.